Hello, I'm Jason Byrne and I'm a Professor of Human Geography and Planning at the University of Tasmania. I've had an excellent question. The question is, I'm 13. In what way is the world going to change around me as I grow up into the future due to climate change? And what actions can I take? Now that's an excellent question. To answer this question, let's do a little bit of a thought experiment. Imagine yourself in 60 years' time. Will you have a family? What sort of housing will you live in? Will you still live in Tasmania? What will the world be like then? That's a long way to look forwards, and sometimes it's really hard to imagine the future. This is me when I was 12, roughly the same age that you are now. Can you pick me out? Yep, that's me with the groovy glasses. So if you'd asked my 12-year-old self to imagine the future, to even imagine the job that I have now, I would have struggled a little bit. But it would be good to get some clues or some tips from my future self to understand what lies ahead. So let's have a go at doing that now. We know that there are going to be some fairly severe impacts from climate change, including in Tasmania, and many of us are already seeing these impacts in our daily lives now. This includes water shortages, increased bushfires, severe weather events like thunderstorms and dust storms, new diseases showing up in Australia. For example, malaria is expected to potentially affect the northern part of Australia. Severe flooding and even infrastructure like railway lines being buckled in severe heat events. So let's cut to the chase for you. In what ways will climate change alter the world? Well, we have some good news and some bad news. Let's start with the bad news first. It's very likely there will be political instability, food and water shortages, populations on the move, extreme weather events, energy shortages, and even species extinctions. So let's pick one of these. We know that Bangladesh, for example, is going to experience extreme weather events in the future, major cyclones. Much of Bangladesh is very low-lying, close to sea level, and will be affected by coastal inundation as sea level rises. And so we're going to see large populations on the move from Bangladesh looking for places elsewhere in the world where they can live. All right, here's some good news though, so it's not all bad news. We are increasingly seeing empowered citizens when it comes to climate change. Young people, for example, standing up, protesting in the streets, protesting in their schools, learning more about what they can do, showing amazing leadership. We're also seeing people my age taking leadership too. New sources of food will become possible to make up for some sources of food that we might struggle to meet. For example, we might have insect-based diets in the future. We already recycle water in cities like Singapore, and that technology is available, and we know we can do that in the future as well. And Australia is becoming a leader in large-scale renewable energy projects. So it's not all bad. Let's look back to the past in order to understand what the future might look like. So when I was your age, when I was 12, people still smoked on aircraft. Can you believe that? Smoking on aircraft? Well, smoking is pretty much a thing of the past in most parts of our cities these days. It's very rare to find a place where people are still welcome to smoke. Drink driving was common. Being gay was a crime, and yet now we have same-sex marriage. Whales were hunted to extinction. Now we watch whales in tourism ventures. Australia was a much less diverse place. Now it's one of the most multicultural societies around. And importantly, we had major environmental problems when I was growing up that really worried me. Acid rain was a big problem, and there was a huge hole in the ozone layer. Both of those environmental issues are now being managed very well. So there's hope. Let's also have a look at other places around Australia that experience a similar climate to major cities in Tasmania. So let's pick on Hobart as an example. If we look to the CSIRO's Climate Analogues website and we enter the emissions data that currently exist and we project those forwards using emission scenarios through to, say, 2050, we can see Hobart's future climate is much like places like Geelong or Burra on mainland Australia. Now, people live in those places, right? And they live very rich and fulfilling lives. They will have higher temperatures in the future than what we do now. with episodic flooding from major rainfall events, certainly more bushfires, but also interesting species showing up. So in Tasmania, we're already seeing some tropical species from Queensland showing up in Tasmanian waters. And while we might have our giant kelp forests under threat, scientists are finding new ways to breed heat-tolerant kelp in marine environments that can also soak up lots of carbon. So there are messages of hope here too. Let's pick on another window of change that I want to share with you as a planner. There's a city in Korea called Seoul, and they've done a remarkable transition since 2005 when the mayor decided that instead of fixing a freeway that needed major repairs in the Cheonggaecheong area of Seoul, that they would instead tear down that freeway and bring back into the daylight a stream that had previously been put into pipes. So they undertook this enormous multi-million-dollar ecological restoration project, tore down the freeway, created a large linear park. We've now got a whole range of new species reappearing back in Seoul, and people are living much richer, more diverse and fulfilling lives with this wonderful green space opportunity they have in that city. So we can do incredible things with our own abilities we have right now if we just put our minds to it. Let's look back into the past as well. In Hobart about 60, 80 years ago, we had lots of trams. People got around on trams all the time, as these images show us. The city was recognisable. If you look at the city today, some things have changed, but there are still buildings in the same places we had back then. And people lived interesting and different lives to what we do now. So my point is, as we begin to think about what the future is that lies ahead of us and ahead of you, it has enormous opportunities as well as some issues that we'll have to be very clever with how we manage them. Our cities are more likely to be greener. We might be using resource recovery, for example, taking sewage and converting that into power, electricity, but also gas for cooking. And ultimately, we may be able to have our cities give back to the environment, what we call net positive development in planning. So thank you, Peregrine School, grades 7 to 10, for this excellent question. There are some challenges that lie ahead of us, and especially that lie ahead of you as you go from 13 to, say, 63. You'll see some big changes in your lifetimes, but also there are incredible opportunities. Now, you can do some actions right now that'll make a real difference for climate change, and I would encourage you to look at the resource website that goes with these videos, which your teacher can make available to you. They include things like starting a worm farm, travelling less by air, using solar panels if you're reliant on fossil fuels, getting together with your neighbours and getting to know them and build a real sense of community so you can look after each other in those kind of extreme weather events that will happen from time to time. So thanks for your question.